Well, I thought we would somehow sneak the sophistry debate in here, but I don't know that that'll happen now. Unless we just want to go for a whole other hour, but I don't know that I want to do that.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose if we broke it up, we usually have slightly longer than an hour, so you could go like 10 minutes, but I figured that would be a longer than 10-minute conversation.
That'll probably end up being another 2 hours.
The gist of what I was going to get at is I think you're conflating humanism with sophistry. That's just all I'll say.
I don't agree.
Protagoras was a humanist, but not all the sophists were. Well, he was
he was a relativist.
Okay, sure, similar thing. But not all the sophists were relativists.
Agreed. Well, that's the point, is that sophists were such a broad group they have some things that unify them in their perceptions of how they frame things.
No, see, they didn't have that either. No,
they
didn't.
I disagree.
Well, then I would stipulate that you're incorrect.
Well, you
can
stipulate that.
The thing is, they were they were very varied before. The issue I took is that you were trying to say that you were attempting to say they deserve a unified definition without the criticism that came from the later contemporaries. But my point is that criticism only arose when they began to show unified definition, because literally before they had any unifying characteristics, they were just traveling philosophy teachers.
Correct.
Who had no unifying characteristics.
No, they had some unifying characteristics.
No, because they often didn't even teach the same things. It's like he would teach ethics, he taught ontologically.
Correct. But they still had unifying characteristics, yes.
No, they didn't, because they were not all relativists at that point, because there's nothing relativist about ontology.
Yes.
No. Relativism is an ethical term. Ontology has no relativistic element.
But the point is relative truth.
Or rhetoric is not a relativistic concept.
Yes, that's correct. The rhetoric
so
is
a teacher,
point.
But some of them taught rhetoric. Not all of them taught rhetoric.
But the idea of not having the truth be, or the end goal being a one side or the other, but just simply the argument itself.
They didn't originally
they all did.
Not at the beginning they didn't.
Yes, 100%.
No, but see, this is where I would say
with Stanford and Harvard and many people that have already looked up.
Yes, I disagree with them on transgenderism too.
Well, that's great.
So you can't use them as the authority.
I'm just simply saying you're disagreeing with a lion's share of education.
People who are usually correct, to which I go, they're certainly not correct about everything.
I agree.
Because here's things they're not correct about.
I'm simply saying that there is a number of...
The word sophist literally just means...
wisdom.
Yes, or wise man.
Yes.
And so to say that all the sophists originally had this unifying theme, it's like, of course they didn't. Because otherwise we would have referred to them by that unifying theme, not by simply that they were experts in whatever. Because you could be an expert in whatever. That is what the definition of the word means. A master woodworker would have been called a sophist in Greek. That is what the word meant. It was only as they coalesced to share similar traits, and it was at that very same moment when other philosophers started to criticize them for such things. So it's like...
For what such things? Because
the more moral relativistic elements.
Which I don't actually have a problem with.
Well, but see, that's just where I go, okay, Paul has an issue with you then.
That's fine.
If you're going to say, well, I can be a moral relativist, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm like, yeah.
Again, this is where
Peter might say,
this is where, again,
I've got a problem.
Hairs, but what I am doing is I appreciate and value the idea of sophist philosophy in that, even the relativistic sense, in that I don't think it's unfair to state, and we'll get into this because I don't think we're going to be able to really fully unpack this, but the bottom line is relativism, largely associated with Protagoras in that he was a humanist, is a statement not that truth cannot exist at all. It is that truth is dependent on, it is made up of, I suppose maybe I should say, culture and language and
I reject interaction. And so did Plato and so did Aristotle.
That's great.
Well, but see, this is what I'm saying is you attempt to say they don't deserve the criticism of Plato and Aristotle because before they had that, they had some other unifying thing. It's like, no, the unifying thing that they all did share eventually, which I don't believe they did at the beginning, they eventually coalesced to share once the term sophistry became a term that didn't just refer to everyone who was an expert in any random field. it was at that same time that this criticism arose, which means the criticism is innate.
The criticism,
unless you reject
not,
the Aristotelian or Platonic notions, which you're on shaky ground if you're going to say, yes, the foundations of all Western philosophy I reject.
No.
Plato and Aristotle, or I guess technically Socrates to begin with.
But that's to say that anything pre-Socratic is useless. That's silly.
Not useless in the same sense that a dead end is useful in that it shows you which way not to go. But you're suggesting that the way they went was not a bad way, to which I would say, no, it was a bad way, and we learned from it and went in this other way thanks to their example of showing us the wrong way.
No, not just that. In fact, in Plato's
truth is not dependent on perception, is what I would say. You did just say that 2 minutes ago.
No, I didn't say that.
Yes, you did say it was dependent on culture and on a whole bunch of other things. It's then it's not
made
truth.
Up of. That's what I said.
No, then it's not truth. It's just consensus.
No.
Yes.
No, what I'm saying is it contributes to. Think about Jewish culture contributing to the interactions with God in the Old Testament. Think about Greek culture and Roman culture.
These are not truths. These are just consensuses.
It doesn't
consensuses.
But the point is, they make
it kind of does matter if truth is what you want.
They make up and interact with how people perceive reality, and whether or not I think
perception of reality is not the same thing as truth, though, because you can perceive reality incorrectly.
I agree, but my point is the way in which I say this truth for me.
This borders on pluralism is the issue.
No, and I'm not saying I'm a pluralist. What I'm saying,
but relativism and pluralism are at best holding hands.
No, yes, I agree that they are similar, but I don't think that they are. I don't think you can.
Pluralism wouldn't exist without relativism.
But what I'm stating is that relativism states...
The idea that no one can know the truth, therefore we might all be holding the truth, where I just go, no.
No, I'm not... No, see, that's not...
Again, you're opening that door.
No, you're not. What I'm saying is, I hold a particular truth that I believe is absolute truth. I could be wrong.
In which case, it isn't absolute truth, even if you think it is. Yes. That's, I guess, my point, in which I go... That's not relativism.
I believe it's absolute truth, and I'm going to live my life in such a way that says I'm going to die with this particular absolute truth. However, on a global level, I could be wrong.
That's not relativism at that point, because you are acknowledging an absolute.
Acknowledging I could be wrong.
An absolute.
Could be right.
Okay, but absolutism and relativism are opposites.
No, what I'm saying is people are holding different truths, and what I'm saying is
that's not
you
relativism.
Cannot know
that's
what
not
the
relativism.
actual truth is.
No, that's not. That I disagree with.
Yes, it is.
No, because you can't hold the concept of absolute truth by saying no one can know it.
What I'm saying is,
then
I have
an
it
doesn't
absolute
exist.
truth that I am going to live my life using that
I will
standard.
hold you very much to the pedantic fire and say, if there is the possibility that you are wrong, then what you hold is not absolute truth. You might think I'm holding the absolute truth.
With Paul as well, because Paul said that he should be pitied essentially if he is incorrect. So
because absolute truth exists outside of him.
He's even saying to himself. He's even saying in that passage. He's going, if I'm wrong, then I've lived my life and it's basically a waste. But
this is exactly the opposite of relativism.
And again,
because what he has is not absolute truth.
The way I live my life is in a way that says this is what I believe truth to be.
That's not what I think relativism means. I think you're misinterpreting it then in that case.
Because
relativism would mean because no one can know the truth, no, there is no truth.
No.
Or this idea
doesn't demand that there is no truth. What it says is truth is relative.
Those are the same sentiments.
No, it's not.
Because by definition, truth can't be relative. Truth is absolute on its face.
I disagree.
That's the definition of truth. Something cannot be... If a fact is revealed scientifically, we say, okay, this is what we know. This is the truth now. And then, 10 years down the line...
That's 100%
something is discovered, and we go, oh, we were wrong previously. The truth has not changed. We have gotten closer. No, false. Absolute. I will staunchly deny. In fact, I will go so far as to say this borders on intellectual foolishness.
No.
To say the truth has changed. No, you have changed in respect to the truth.
Pluto used to be a planet. Now it's not. How do you justify that?
We were wrong before.
Okay, but before
that wasn't the truth.
Tests that were saying this is the truth.
But no, okay, those tests were wrong. You're suggesting that because people believed it, again, consensus.
It's based on time and religion.
But this is not. That doesn't make it truth. This doesn't make it
history,
truth.
It's all this kind of stuff.
This is not truth, though. This is just consensus.
No, my point
When
is,
Pluto was viewed to be a planet, that was what you would call consensus. It was not the truth.
at the time, it was not, though.
It was consensus.
Presented not as consensus, but as truth.
But truth is always presented as So the frick what?
It's.
I do not care how things are presented because that has no bearing on what they are.
It is. Because
you could show me an apple that happens
back.
to look like an orange. That doesn't make it an orange.
I understand that, but in the same way, going back
To say-
historically and saying something used to be true.
No, nothing ever used to be true that is now not true, unless the thing itself changed.
Okay.
That's the argument. No. You border on heresy, no offense.
No, I'm not.
You do. Because to suggest, well, the truth always changes based on what we know, it's like, that is so far from correct. This is why I think it borders on pluralism, is because you go, well, Islam might be right.
No,
I can't know
suggesting
that.
Islam might be right. What I'm saying is...
They believe it. To them, it's truth.
Of course.
How can you
to
deny
them, it's
it?
truth.
And therefore, okay, so this is pluralism.
No, it's not. Pluralism suggests I actually believe that anybody can be correct.
But, okay, you believe that Christianity is truth. They believe that Islam is truth. They are, as much as...
And that is a relative
As much as
truth.
modern things like to say that they can be compatible, they are contradictory at
Correct.
times.
And they're
which
not
means they
compatible
cannot
at all.
both be truth.
I agree. They
Which
can't
means
both be
one
true.
of them is
One
wrong.
of them is truth.
But see, this is where you're going at
But
the
we
same
don't know.
time.
We
yes,
cannot
but
know as
Pluto,
humans.
when we believed Pluto was a planet, or at least we classified it as a planet, we were wrong. To say, well, we believed it then, but these people don't believe it now, we can't both be
I'll say it
correct,
this
which means
way.
one of us
Let's-
was wrong
let's reverse
and one of
that.
us was right.
We believe it now that it's not a planet. I believe it to be a planet still.
Then I would call you wrong.
Okay, that's fine. But what I'm saying is we believe it to be a planet now.
but see,
That
this
is
is-
a time frame based statement. We believe it to be a planet now. It's very possible in the future they'll say it's a planet again. Who knows? In the same way that they've said cholesterol's bad, no, it's good. No, it's bad. No, certain cholesterol's bad. We can't. It's.
But
this
all
is why I'm
science
saying,
is an effort to find that which doesn't change, which means that when things
Correct.
change, it is us who are at fault, not the facts. We got the facts wrong, in the same sense that
So how can
Islam
you
and
know-
Christianity cannot both be true. You just acknowledged it, which means one group of people
and
is
sci-
wrong.
And science is far
In the
easier
same
to
sense as
tease
even
those
though,
things out
yeah,
and
but
look
even
at-
though they were separated by time, those who believe Pluto is a planet and those who do not
Correct.
cannot both be correct, which means one is
Agreed.
wrong, one is right.
Agreed.
So even though they're separated by time, whereas the Christians and the Muslims are not separated,
separated
by time,
by religion.
It's well, I'm saying they can
But this is
they can
this is a
exist at the
relative
same time.
statement.
No, but I'm saying they are not. Because the issue is when
I'm
you, when
not
you introduce
conflating
time into
pluralism.
when you introduce time into the equation, that you make it difficult because now those who believe Pluto is a planet and those who used to believe Pluto is a planet, it's like you can, I guess maybe I'm overcomplicating it because I guess if you're confessing to be a person who believes that Pluto is still a planet,
No, I'm
Then I would
obviously
say-
being slightly tongue in cheek with that.
well, but
still,
we've established why I think that's stupid and why I think you're being stupid if you're going to acknowledge
that's
it.
fine.
Because that I would just say that is willful intellectual dishonesty. To say I'm going to hold to a belief that has been shown not to be correct simply because I don't believe that anyone can know what's correct. That's just where I go, okay, then let's skip all the pretense and say I want to believe what I believe regardless of evidence.
That's
Which is what you're
certainly true of
effectively
everybody.
saying. No.
Yes, they believe things that they want to believe. Period.
Well, okay, regardless, yes, there are people who do that, and I would call them fools. And if you want to be one of them,
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I believe on a Christian level based on what I believe to be evidential and based on what I believe to be truth. However, there are scientists that also believe that I'm an absolute ignoramus because
but you
they
cannot
have proof
both be
and
right.
evidence. Agreed,
Therefore,
which is
one
why
of
I'm saying.
therefore one of your quote
One
unquote
of-
truths is not a truth; it is
Correct.
a falsehood.
But therefore, both because of the fact that we're sitting in the Schrodinger's cat concept right now in a humanist perspective, it is a relative. There's no way we can know it until we find out.
This is not what I think relativism means. Then I think
Well,
you're
that's-
altering what it means.
Maybe.
Because
But-
relativism, I do think that there is a daisy chain that is unbreakable between relativism and pluralism,
And that
which
is-
says that because
and that may be so, but I'm rejecting that and saying I'm not.
But see
conflating
that
pluralism and
but see that
relativism.
very phrase is an intellectually dishonest phrase.
No, it's
There
not.
may be an unavoidable link, but I am
I'm not
trying
saying
to
it's
avoid
unavoidable
it.
link. I'm
Well, no,
clarifying in my
well then you're going to have to
perception.
retract your statement.
I'm not.
Because you just said,
I'm not
no, you
retracting
did just
anything.
said there very well may be a connection between them that can't be avoided, but I choose to avoid it anyways.
No,
So
I'm saying in
retract
my
that statement, or
in my perspective in my particular philosophy, when I talk about sophistry, when I talk about relativism, I'm not saying that I think relativism and pluralism are the same thing. In the same way that you talk about self-centeredness being different than what most people would consider self-centeredness to be. I'm clarifying that relativism to me does not inherently redound to pluralism. I don't think that's a fair
I
assessment.
believe that logically speaking, it must by
And
the
I
logical
disagree.
by the logical axioms.
I
Well, then
think
you must
that-
present a reason why it does not
because
logically
we
follow.
live in a state of we live in a state of in our existence right now where a lot of metaphysical and ontological arguments are not able to be fully known based
But
on
that
the
does
fact
not
that
make.
we can't.
But then you cannot claim truth. Is what my point is. You're saying
Agreed.
I can claim truth now, even though I don't know.
No, I can claim.
And then
to be,
when
I can claim
it's
my
changed
truth.
later, then that phrase is how we get to the hellhole we live in.
No, what I'm suggesting.
I'm just going to say that is the phrase that leads us to the place we're in, which I don't
Agreed.
like being in.
I understand.
So if you're going to
what you're
concede that, you're
hearing.
not going to avoid you're not going to avoid where we've gotten to, because that's how we got here.
That may be true.
That is the door
That
through which we came, and so you cannot say, "Well, I like that door, though."
No, I'm not
That's
suggesting.
where I go, no, we
what
went
I'm
down this
saying
path
is-
and we don't like where we are. We must then forsake the path. We can't say, I like the path, though, even though it leads through hell. It's like, well, sorry, the path leads through hell. And so either take the onus, take the ownership and say, I want to be in hell, or no, the choice I made led to this and I cannot, again, as we just said, the Schrodinger's choice, I cannot have the unity, I cannot have the plethora that existed before the unity, because the unity we're in isn't what I wanted. I want to be able to go down this path and have it not lead to hell. Well, sadly, we live in the unity where that's not the case.
Correct.
So to hold on to a thing that
Which is why
that doesn't exist
my own
is
philosophy
folly.
say, look, this is what I believe to be truth, and I'm going to state it that way. When I'm speaking to people, I'm going to say, I'm a Christian person, and I believe that this is the truth.
Sure, but
And
then
I can say that.
But then
I
you don't
can't-
get to claim that it remains truth even when things change. And of course, I'm not in a faith-based sense. That's kind of like, well, that won't change. You'll never really have any evidence until the end, at which point
Correct.
it's too late.
That's all I'm saying.
I'm saying you must be logically consistent then, which means in a scientific sense, you also have to admit, I believe that Pluto is a planet as a true statement. And then when the evidence is proposed, it says, actually, based on this reevaluation, we believe that this is now the correct case.
Now, I am
You must
changing
then
my
accept
perception
and go,
based
okay,
on time.
I am now.
And
Well, but see, this
information.
is where I go.
That's
Time
a
does,
relative truth.
no, time
Yes.
makes no difference, because you could also be just misinformed, and that's no longer a time-based thing. There might be knowledge
Sure,
all
it's a
around you that
culture-based thing
contradicts
at
what
that
you
point,
say.
which is why I'm saying it's relative.
But then it isn't truth, is my point. What you claim to hold as truth was wrong,
But someone holds that as truth,
which means
and what I'm
absolutely
saying-
bubkiss.
No, what I'm saying is
that
no
it
matter
is held does not give it any validity whatsoever.
Agreed. So the
So it's
truth
no
that
longer
you
true. It
hold
is not truth, regardless of who believes
The
it.
truth that you hold is only the framework that you're using. That's the only possibility right now. Now, do I believe that I'm going to get there on Judgment Day, and have it be the truth that I'm standing before God Almighty? Yes, absolutely, I believe that 100%. Am I going to state it that way to others? Yes, 100%. But can I say with absolute certainty, yes, I'm doing this versus somebody else that's incorrect? No, that's why you don't see me in the same manner as other people that act like set themselves up as some sort of
This just seems.
sage,
I must.
of-
I must speak bluntly and say this just seems like the cowardice to admit that you're wrong.
No, I'm not.
Because you're saying, well, but if we get to Judgment Day and will have been wrong, yeah, that will suck.
Yeah.
But we will have been wrong.
Yes.
And
I
holding
agree.
on to the idea of, well, it was true. We believed
not
it to be
suggesting
true.
that it was
you
true.
are suggesting
No,
that,
what
though,
I'm
because you're
saying
saying that,
is-
well, because of the consensus based on time or culture,
I'm not
it
saying
was the truth at a
consensus. You're
particular
saying
point.
Consensus.
Well, I am using the word consensus, but you are using the definition of the word consensus. So yes, I am saying what you're saying, and you're going to have to make an argument that I'm not, because as far as the definitions you've said, consensus is the word that matches them.
No.
Yes.
Me saying
time and place, regardless. Essentially, you're saying that, well, because in a different time and place this was truth, therefore we can still call it truth, even though we are no longer in that time and place.
I'm not
that calls it truth.
suggesting that you can call Pluto being a planet truth.
Well, you
anymore.
did say that. You did actually say about 10 minutes.
Rather tongue in cheek.
Well, then
I'm suggesting,
that was a foolish argument to make if you didn't mean it.
My point is, I was intentionally being facetious. My point is that it was truth at one point.
No, it wasn't.
Now,
this is the cowardice to admit that you were wrong. Because what you should say is not
presented as truth. Is that a better way of stating it? It was presented as truth at one point. And now, what's presented to us as truth is that it's not a planet.
But see,
that's all we know.
But this is where I take offense. This is where I take issue with the use of with presentation as if that gives validity. To which I actually say, no, that's precisely why it loses validity. It was presented as truth, sure, and it wasn't
presented as truth now as to being not a planet. And you're saying that being presented as not a planet gives no validity to it.
What?
That's what you just stated.
What you just said did not make much sense to me.
You stated that if it's presented as truth, then it doesn't have any validity. Well,
no, I did not. No. I did not say that by definition, being presented as truth makes it invalid. I'm saying.
So clarify.
You keep redounding to you. You have said multiple times it was truth, and I say no, it wasn't definitionally, and you're saying fine, it was presented as truth. To which I say that's irrelevant. The presentation of something is irrelevant to its trueness. It's verisimilitude, I suppose. Well, that doesn't technically mean that. It's veracity. So this is where I'm just saying presentation means nothing, is I guess the point. So you could say, well, they're presenting it to us now as truth, therefore that presentation must mean nothing true. To which I'd say, if we're going to be intellectually honest, we have to say, yes, I suppose.
That's all I'm saying.
We all have to acknowledge that we might be wrong, but that's not relativism.
It is.
Relativism is not the possibility that I might be wrong. It is the holding of separate views and saying we can't determine, therefore they both are correct.
Pluralism.
This is where I do believe that logically speaking they are on, if not on the same if not the same thing, on the same spectrum.
Maybe.
Because to say we can't know, therefore it all, again, this is you're the one who brought up Schrodinger's cat. The argument then is because we can't know, both are true, and that is where I go. That is the definition of pluralism. So relativism might be merely, in your interpretation, the statement that we can't know, but by the definition of Schrodinger's cat, because we can't know, both must be true. That's pluralism, which means they are at the very least. At the very least, they're holding hands if they are not the one and the same concept. One just slightly formulated with greater precision. To which I go, well, then you don't get to have one without the other, which is what you're trying to do. You're trying to say, I'm choosing a logical framework that excludes that possibility.
Correct. Only because of the fact that I have opted into a particular belief system based on choice, that I say, again, faith at times does stand in the face of adversity, in that it's like, oh, we've got all this evidence that says you're wrong, and it's like, well, I don't care. And so it's like there is a point in which you say truth is relative, meaning that...
Yeah, but see, that's just where I go, then one of us doesn't have truth.
Correct.
You keep trying to redound the fact that, well, both of us believe it's truth, which is where I go, well, that's irrelevant, what you believe. One of us has truth, one of us doesn't, or quite possibly neither of us has truth. I believe intellectual honesty is to say, there's a chance we might be wrong about this, yes.
Yes.
But that's not relativism. Relativism is not the possibility that we might be wrong. Relativism is that we cannot know the truth. Those are two different statements.
If humans are the measure of all things.
Well, man is the measure of all things. Correct. It's not quite the same thing as saying humans.
Man, then, is the measure of all things.
And I'm not saying that he was right either.
What I'm saying is that sentiment is exactly that.
But see, I don't agree with that.
I don't agree with the idea that...
I don't believe that what that means is man gets to decide what all things mean. It is that man is the only metric.
Correct.
Which does not mean
that's what he's saying.
No, yeah, but that's not the same thing as saying man gets to decide. That is simply saying that either.
Man. I'm saying man is the only metric in which we can use. No, I'm saying man is the only measuring stick we have, and it's insufficient. It's deficient.
Yeah,
in
but
being
see,
able
now
to
we're getting
define
back
truth.
into your strange obsession with solipsism, to which I go.
It is a solipsistic
anything
argument.
which
I'm
can't
not
be
disagreeing with
anything
that.
which by its definition cannot be solved is useless.
I disagree. And I've said this before about solipsism too.
Well, but see, we had our whole conversation by which you seemed to be coming around to that, to my analysis of it, which means you are choosing, you have found some reason not to do so.
Well,
Because
I just
there
still
are
reject
three
the idea
there are
it's
three
useless.
layers of unknowing. There is, on the evolutionary sense, the concept of the missing link, which is we don't have all the evidence to prove evolution, but we do know what we are missing. Which means if we found that thing, we would then have the proof. Up until then, we have to acknowledge, well, we don't actually know. It still remains a theory. Because we're missing the final piece of the puzzle. But we know what that is. With the next level of impossibility is like the concept of going faster than the speed of light, where our current framework suggests that it's not possible, and we don't even know what we're missing to make it possible. Whereas, so in one instance, we don't know, but we at least think we would recognize what we were missing if we saw it. On the next level, it's we wouldn't even recognize what we were missing if we saw it because we don't even know what we're missing.
Correct.
There is the deepest level of impossibility, which is if I were to ask you to draw me a or a four-sided triangle, you, by no metric at all, could ever succeed at doing that.
Correct.
And I say, and that solipsism exists on that level of impossibility, where it's not merely something that we could solve if we had the right information. It's not merely even something that we are missing even what the right information would be, but perhaps maybe in the future we would stumble on it and then know what we were missing.
Correct.
It is, by its definition and on its face, an unknowable.
Correct.
In the same way that it is...
literally human life.
See, I don't agree with that.
Okay. I mean, again, what places do you see in Scripture where God says, your thoughts are not my thoughts and your ways are not my ways? That literally means that humans are not going to ever be able to grasp in totality what the actual picture is. And therefore...
Those are not the same statement.
The statement, yep.
No, because...
Yes.
I will fully agree with you that man is not capable of comprehending the mind of God, but that is not what you just said. You just said that is human life. Human life we are capable of comprehending.
Yes, we're capable of comprehending human life, but that's not truth. Truth is God's.
Which is given to us, though. I do agree with you.
Yes, and
in that sense, we're not operating on its face, it's impossible. We're operating probably on the second level of we don't know what we're missing. But it
correct, but we'll never know.
See, that's just where I go. That's you
stating.
Prophesying that we'll never know. To
No,
which I go,
what I'm saying is
we will actually
the Bible
know
at
someday.
face value based on belief.
So am I, and we will know someday.
Yeah, when we are dead.
That will be a day of knowing.
Correct.
Which means that someday we will find the information that we lack.
Truth. At that point,
Which means we are on, at best, the second layer of impossibility, which is, yes, it's impossible, but someday we might stumble upon what we need.
Relative.
But that's not what I would consider relative, because solipsism, in my view, exists on the deepest level of impossibility, which is, on its face, by definition, a triangle cannot have four sides. On its face, you cannot know or not know solipsism. It cannot be proved or disproved by its definitions.
Correct.
It exists on that, and God does not exist on that level. God exists on the level of, though we cannot know him now, someday we will, because that is in fact
based
promised.
on a belief. Solely. You have to admit that. It's a hard thing to swallow, but it's true.
But I see that's where I think that there is no... That doesn't disqualify it. Why would that be relevant?
Because that's my point. Belief is required in any sort of truth.
Belief is required for
relative.
the... Belief would... No, because belief does not make a thing relative.
Yes, 100%.
No.
If it's
you
not
can believe
based in
something that's...
absolutism,
If you found absolute truth and believed in it, you would not be relativistic at that point. Even, let's go further, even if you didn't know that it was absolute truth and you merely believed it, you'd be right.
No.
Yes. Oh, see, this is the whole concept of simply if, let's posit, aliens exist on Mars, and I say to the world, and I am so convinced of it, and I say to the world, aliens exist on Mars, and if people ask me for proof, I say, I don't have any, I just know it in my soul. And then, aliens exist on Mars. Was I right? Yes. Did I have evidence? No. All I had was belief. That does not disqualify me from being correct.
Okay.
So even if you found
fine,
it,
but what if
if you didn't know absolute truth when you found it and you just arbitrarily believed something random and that happened to be the absolute truth, you would still be believing absolute truth.
No, you're
Yes!
just believing a relative truth based on the knowledge that you
No,
have.
because then you're suggesting that aliens on Mars is a relative truth. No, it's an absolute truth because they are there. The fact that I can't prove it now doesn't mean they aren't there.
Sure, and this is where
Absolute
Protagoras
truth exists
yielded-
beyond time is the point.
within Plato's
That's the definition of the word absolute.
within Plato's Protagoras, this is actually when Protagoras and Socrates both yielded and agreed in certain facets of their argument, which is that essentially by the end of it, what Protagoras was trying to get Socrates to see is that truth was not based on what Sophia or wisdom, but that was given to us, which is what Socrates was suggesting. It was based on teaching or something that can actually be constructed, essentially, and
No.
what Socrates was suggesting is that there are parts of truth that are inerrant. They are this is something that's been provided to us, and what they both yielded on is that Protagoras essentially said, okay, well, yeah, I'm realizing that there are certain truths that are self-evident and other truths that aren't, and
But
that
see,
can
that's
be
no
taught.
longer relative, though, because the fact that some are inherent
And
some are not, then you would call
what
those not
Socrates-
truth,
what
and this
Socrates
truth.
yielded was that there are things that can be taught that cannot be inherently possessed. So
But
it's
see,
like,
that's a limited thing, because even Protagoras yields that there are things that are inherent, that regardless of being taught, are true. Those are the absolute truths. Everything else we would call belief. But those are not all that exist.
correct.
So
But
the fact that
point is-
Socrates
but
yielded
the point
there,
is-
it's like, well, that's not what we're talking
but
about. We're talking
point
about the
is
absolute stuff.
something like God, a question of God, based on belief system, is not something. This is where I say relative truth is not something that is not something we deal with as humans. Because you go by the fact that I cannot communicate with absolute certainty that I am correct. It's a relative statement.
But see, that's just
Yes.
where I go, that's not the definition of truth. Truth, even what you just conceded, is that you would have to concede some things, regardless of not being able to be taught,
Yes,
remain
some
true.
things.
So, even if it's only one, then absolute truth exists. Even if only one thing we can say it exists without being taught, then all of the other things might be relative. But if this one thing exists,
But what
that's the
exists
definition of
without being
absolute
taught?
truth. Plenty of things. A child could be given no education throughout its entire life, be lived its entire life isolated, but the things that we believe are true remain true just because it doesn't know it. Like, again, this is a very much the idea that says, well, only because people believe it. It's like, no. If nobody believes, even if I'm not a person who believes that aliens exist on Mars, and they do, absolute truth. Again, this you're trying to make the argument of, well, no one saw the tree fall, so it didn't make a sound. It's like, no. That's not how it works. That is what you're saying, that same thing, which is, well, because no one was there, we can't prove that it made a sound, therefore it didn't make a sound. It's like, well, that's not how it works. Regardless of whether or not something is believed, it can be true. This is in fact the basis of several fallacies. The notion that, well, because he has no evidence, he's wrong. It's like, well, that's actually not logically consistent.
I'm not suggesting that you're wrong. What I'm saying
No,
is you can't know that you're right.
But that doesn't preclude you from being right. No.
Yes.
No. You can't, okay, you might argue that you can't know you're right, but that does not preclude you from being right. The inability to know your rightness is irrelevant to your rightness.
I disagree.
No, I don't know why you would, because if I believe for no reason other than because I want to that aliens exist on Mars, and hypothetically speaking they do, I am right. Can I communicate it? No. So you might say, well, practically speaking, you might be right, but you're of no use because you can't prove it. And I'd concede a certain degree of like, yeah, if you can't argue it, then it's probably not terribly useful. But not being able to argue it does not make it not right. Like, again, the ability to argue something is
truth, though. Because everything, again, is based on a fundamental belief that we have constructed from, given our
but that does not preclude us from being right
culture
about.
and
That
our
doesn't
time
preclude
and
us from
whatever else.
possibly being right.
Yes, possibly.
But that doesn't.
That's what we'll ever always
But that's not the
know as a
definition
man.
of relativism.
Yes.
No, I don't. If there is an absolute truth somewhere, even if we don't know what it is, then relativism is not right. You even admitted this 5 seconds ago, or 5 minutes ago, by saying Socrates, yes, yielded that there are things which can't be taught.
No, that can be taught.
Fine,
again,
whatever.
On a truth level,
But you
there are
must
certain
also
things
acknowledge that
can be taught.
Protagoras yielded and said there may be inherent truths we can't teach. That disproves relativism. This is why Plato wrote that, is because he was opposed to relativism. He's saying, yeah, sure, maybe there's plenty of things we can teach. But the teaching of them does not imbue them with truth. Truth, by the Platonic sense and by all of Western philosophy that follows, well, until you get to the later people who are weird, is that truth does exist, regardless of its being known. You can be right about something and not know that you're right.
And of what use is that?
Well, yes, you can make a consequentialist argument that, well, you're of no use even if you're right and don't know it. Maybe that's the case, but that's not what you're saying. You're saying that, well, because you can't know it, it's not right.
What I'm saying is, in a position where I am interacting with somebody and they believe a particular truth on one side of the equation, I believe a particular truth on the other side of the equation, there is a relative argument to be made in saying, if we have no way of actually getting to a end in which there is a definitive, this is the unequivocal truth, both of us can look at it and see it, then there is no way of actually proving that. Therefore, relative truth also exists.
That is, as far as I know, not the definition of relativism, is that relative truths exist apart from absolute truth. That has not been the understanding, nor has that exactly even sounded like what you've been saying up till now. If what you mean is that there are relative truths in addition to absolute truth,
I think that any absolute truth that we think we know could absolutely, for instance, somebody that was taught that Pluto was a planet, again, that was an absolute truth for them until it wasn't.
No, but see, that's where I go, you're misusing the word absolute truth. It was, I would even object to saying it was a truth, but given if you want to suggest relative truths exist in addition to absolute truth, I'll, for the sake of argument, at least suggest that fine, you can say that that was a relative truth at the time, but that was not, by definition, absolute truth at the time. Absolute truth, by its definition, cannot change. That's what I think.
Agreed, but is there anything in our culture or society that would suggest that that's been the case?
That absolute truth cannot change?
That it doesn't. Because there's been nothing that's that sure over time. At all.
But that, again, I say that's irrelevant.
No, it's not.
It is, again, because you can be right about something without having the proof for it. Again, you are committing a fallacy by saying because it can't be communicated.
I'm not suggesting it's because it can't be communicated.
You have redounded to that many times.
No, what I'm saying is there's no way of knowing one way or the other.
But that is not knowing is irrelevant from truth. A thing is true regardless of if it's known. The tree makes sound even if no one hears it.
You think it does.
Again, but this is where we get in. The onus is on you to disprove it then, so go ahead and do that.
No, it's not.
You don't get to reject the idea of going, yes, I'm going to propose something and I'm not going to prove it.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the onus is not on me to prove anything, because my definition of what I'm telling you is because we cannot know, it's relative.
But that is what I'm saying. But this is what's weird, is that you have acknowledged that Protagoras yielded on the point of absolute truth existing, and that you're simply trying to say...
But he's saying we wouldn't know even what those absolute truths were.
But that does not deprive them of there being absolute truths.
But
because
again,
definitionally
in that
speaking,
case, I would say what use is there to yield that absolute truth is even a possibility if we don't know what those absolute truths are.
This is a consequentialist argument,
sure,
in which I would go, okay, we can talk consequentialism if you want, but you cannot say relativism is true because I take a consequentialist framework. It's like, well, no, that's not how it works. If absolute truths exist, it doesn't matter who knows them, because that's kind of the point of absolute truth. That is, by definition, absolute truth is true regardless of... That's what absolute means. Regardless of knowing,
around that?
By doing the best you can and by being willing to admit when you're wrong.
To yield, correct. But that my point
so
is...
So again, if you insist on the idea of relative truths in addition, then I could yield that, I suppose.
No, but I'm saying you have to frame all of life that way.
I don't believe that you
in order to be willing... Again, sophistry comes back down to one of the things that it actually means, not just wisdom, is also learning. And that, I think, is one of the fundamental reasons why I think it's useful, is because you go, the idea that you have to position yourself in life in a sense that says, I could be wrong about everything. And so I'd be much better off listening to other people's submissions.
But you can easily go too far with that, as is why they were criticized even in their day. Because you could also then say, don't be so open-minded that your brain falls out. It's like, yeah, there's also some people you should just say, no, you're stupid and not listening.
Well, maybe that's true, but what I'm saying...
As a matter of fact, if you're going to take this relativistic view, you could say, I'm not going to listen to anyone because you could all be wrong, and therefore I may as well sit in ignorance.
Yes, you could.
To which I'd say...
Cynicism actually stemmed from sophistry too.
Yes, but this is, again, in opposition to it by going, well, there's no...
Cynicism was not in opposition, it was a stem from it. Sophistry was absolutely a root of cynicism.
Okay, I'm not sure that I know enough about Cynic. I know that Diogenes was weird. So,
wow.
The point is I wouldn't want to be like him, I guess. And this is, again, we even had this is basically coming back around to the conversation we had with... I would not by the philosophical definition, no. By the colloquial definition, yes. Because the colloquial definition, I suppose, has...
Well, to be fair, maybe I haven't done enough cynicism,
But what I would say is that we've essentially come right back around to the whole Humean concept of, like, can you prove the sun will rise tomorrow? Worrying about it is such a waste.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
But see, no, because you're suggesting that because I can't know it, I can't state it. To which I go, I can state it, because if it doesn't...
You can state it, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm not uncomfortable with the notion that I can't bolt it to the Earth's core.
Neither am I.
So because you're relative.
No, but you're suggesting that because I can't bolt this, then I can't hold any belief that way. And it's like, well, that's not true, because if absolute truth exists, it will exist regardless of being known.
But we don't know what.
And so you're taking a consequentialist argument, which is, well, if we can't know it, then what's the use? To which I go, that is a framework you can adopt. I still think that it's kind of, again, it's like Solipsism. It's useless. It leads nowhere.
Sure, and I talked about the fact that it was going to be a split.
So the only answer, again, as I said, the only answer to Solipsism is to stop asking the question. That is the only thing you can do with Solipsism that is of any practical use.
Or to keep asking questions.
No. Well, okay, Solipsism...
But see, that's my point. That is what the point of Solipsism is to identify you have to keep digging, because there's no way of knowing one way or the other.
Because Solipsism suggests that no matter how hard you dig, you'll never find.
And that's the truth.
No, it isn't.
100%.
Because eventually you will die and the truth will be made known.
If
God does not exist, you will die and learn that too.
You won't.
I mean, you won't consciously learn it, but it will manifest itself to you. That's what my point is. Like, I'm not suggesting that God existing is the absolute truth. I'm simply saying that eventually people like to say that, well, you won't know it till you die, which means you can't prove it. It's like, well, the dying will kind of prove it.
Yeah.
It'll be too late to do anything about it at that point, at which point you might want to get your things in order first. But if God doesn't exist, you will die and learn. Now, will you consciously learn? I mean, at that point you start having to have questions about what consciousness and what learning definitionally mean. But I'm saying the point of the matter is, facts reveal themselves. Do they reveal themselves in timely manners? No. I'm not suggesting by any means that life is easy or that facts... No. Then they were never facts. That which shifts was never truth.
But there's no way of knowing what will shift and what won't.
But again, that does not preclude one of those things from being correct.
Yes, I agree.
No matter what,
we're coming back to pluralism then. But that's not what I'm saying.
Well,
and again,
then why'd you bring it up? Because I wasn't.
Again, I'm splitting hairs, but that's why.
Well, at least that's a step forward to acknowledge that much.
I said this in the original text when we were talking about this, that I was going to be splitting hairs.
Well, but this is my point: is that you cannot say that the benefit of solipsism is that it makes us dig, when solipsism it literally says digging won't help. You can't extrapolate. Well, if digging won't help, we should dig. That is literally what solipsism tells you won't do anything. Therefore, the only valuable thing you could do with solipsism is drop it. It's not a dead end. It's not a starter. It goes nowhere. A dead end must mean we started here, we went there, and we couldn't go any further from there. If you can't start at all, it's not even a dead end.
So in your definition of any sort of philosophical argument, it must have a heading, and the minute it has a dead end, it's no longer a useful philosophy.
No, I exactly said the opposite of that just now, because solipsism is not a dead end. It doesn't start. A dead end is...
It does. What it states, by definition...
What it states is absolutely nothing. Quite literally, if you were to boil it down, what it means is absolutely nothing. And I don't mean that I'm not speaking pedantically. I mean, it says nothing. That is the only thing of which you can be sure is nothing. Therefore, drop it and move on, because literally there's no going. You started here. I mean, I guess if you want to say it's a dead end in the sense that you could start facing a wall, but you haven't gone anywhere.
To the wall.
Like you haven't, that's not, oh, I followed this path and then found that it stopped at some point. It's, no, I'm at the end of the path. So the only possible solution is to go the other way. That's what I'm saying. It's not like, well, it led us to a couple things, because I believe that there are plenty of philosophies that are wrong. I believe
Sure.
Kant was wrong about many things, but he still has use in that he postulates, in fact, well, better actually would be Nietzsche. I think Nietzsche was wrong about lots of things and right about just as many other things, which means Nietzsche is still of use because it's the Edison principle of, well, we learned how not to do it, which
Right.
does
So
instruct us on where to go, but solipsism doesn't even tell us how not to do it. It just says, no help for you.
But getting back to sophistry absolutely has given us ability to contributions to rhetoric and to language and to...
Yeah, but see, sophistry doesn't get to take credit for rhetoric.
It 100%
No, it doesn't, because they were
Yes.
not the only teachers of rhetoric.
I'm sorry, that sophistry was the proponent of rhetoric, because before then,
Okay,
in
but
the polis,
all A's
in
are B,
Athens
not
and-
all B's are A.
What is that supposed
As
to
in,
mean?
yes, rhetoric comes from the sophists in the Greek sense. But rhetoric is not like the sophists can claim it. Other people taught
100%.
rhetoric.
No. Not
Yes,
before
because
the sophists.
the Greeks were not the only civilization. I'm sorry to reveal that. They did not have. They were not the only ones
My
with
point
rhetoric.
is,
So rhetoric exists
in the same way
as a
that-
practice
as in the same
that they
way
don't
that
get to
they
take
were
sole
not
credit
the only
for.
ones that philosophized. I mean, you can't say
I
that
agree,
the-
which is precisely my point in saying they don't get to take credit for the one
in the
thing
same
that
way
we
Plato
like.
can't take credit for Western philosophy. That's a foolish statement.
He can't take credit for philosophy, the concept. He can take credit for his proposed axioms and everything built on top of them. Yes.
In the same way that sophistry can take credit for all of the rhetoric that was built off
No,
of their
because
ideas.
no, because rhetoric is not built off of their ideas.
Yes.
Rhetoric is the overarching branch of teaching.
That they made.
No, they didn't make it up.
100%.
No, they didn't.
Yes.
They did not make it
There
up.
was not an existing notion of oration
That's
based
not
on
true.
politics.
That's
Yes,
not-
no, before sophistry, no.
No,
They started to teach.
You're
Yes.
incorrect about this.
No, I'm not.
Then provide the evidence.
I
because
read
people
multiple
have been
articles.
orators.
Would you like me to
People have
bring
been
them out
orators
and read
since
the-
literally the beginning.
Yes,
of
and
human
specifically
speech.
with politics, that it was an important thing.
Rhetoric
for
is not a
people
political thing only.
I understand that, but it was a keynote for politics
In
specific-
Athens, yes. So if you want to say
Correct.
politics in Athens
No,
takes credit
and
from the
then
sophists,
it-
but that is not
and then
rhetoric
at a broader,
takes
and
credit
then
from the
at broad-
sophists.
And then at a broader level, they began
You're putting the
teaching
cart
it because
before the
fact-
horse
no,
is
I'm
my
not.
point.
What I'm suggesting
They
is
taught
that the
rhetoric
sophists-
because rhetoric existed.
No.
Yes.
They taught
In the
rhetoric
same-
because they realized that it was going to be necessary for political life in a broader sense as polises started to develop.
But they were not the only ones who did that.
Yes.
No.
They
In
were.
Athens, maybe, but Athens was not the only
I'm
civilization
not suggesting
in which
only
there
in
were
Athens.
orators.
What I'm saying is they traveled around. That was literally
They
what
did not travel to ancient China.
Okay,
and there were
so again,
orators
I
in
say
ancient China.
That's
Therefore,
the same
they can-
argument as saying
no.
that anything that was similar in
Okay.
philosophical
No.
argument to Plato
But I
in
meant-
China
no, I
is
made
no
the-
longer something he can take credit for.
But
That's
he
foolish.
can't. No.
So Plato can't take credit for anything that has also some similar ideas tangentially in China. Chinese
No,
philosophy.
he can't. Are you suggesting I would say he can? Leibniz and wow, it's odd that I would remember the lesser known one first. Newton, good grief. Leibniz and Newton both, you could say, invented or discovered calculus at the same time in two different places, irrespective of each other. That's possible. One of them was not stealing from the other.
Okay, but the
Newton
point is
cannot
both of
say
them are credited for it, yes?
Leibniz gets a bit of the short end of the stick on that.
Okay, but my point is sophistry can be credited for rhetoric as a contribution. That's all I'm saying.
A contribution, but you were suggesting that all rhetoric That's why I was saying cart before the horse, because you're saying rhetoric comes from the sophists. It's like, no, the sophists taught rhetoric.
Significant contributions to rhetoric in the same way they made significant contributions to language. They were 100% focused. This is why I say they did have overarching ideas.
But if you want to then say, well, the sophists... Yes, but this is where I'm saying that what they were unified in and what they were criticized for was the relativism. To simply say that because they taught rhetoric... Therefore, they should be we should value all that they did because rhetoric was one part of it.
The issue with relativism is why they had such an issue with relativism is because what they did is valued argumentation first and foremost above the actual
truth
result of argumentation.
Well, exactly, and that is why people like Plato took offense because Plato believed
because argumentation inherently is useful. Whether or not you get to a conclusion, argumentation is useful.
That is not what Plato or anyone who criticized them was saying.
I agree. In fact, Plato gave credit to Protagoras for that those
But see,
things.
That's not what relativism means.
The idea of playing the devil's advocate and saying, "Okay, I'm just going to simply play the other side for the sake of actually."
This is not why people criticize them.
No, you're right.
People criticize them for the moral relativism, which is to say, yes, rhetoric is valuable. But it should be subjugated to the higher order of value.
And that's not what the sophists believe. What they said was rhetoric is useful, period. Which I agree with.
No, what you just said, that they believed it was primary even over truth.
Correct.
Which must be the case, because you can't say this is what we believe is best without saying everything else falls beneath it. And it was people like Plato and all the people after him who said, no, rhetoric is useful only in so much as it can help us reveal truth. Now, maybe it can't always do that. But truth still holds precedence over the rhetoric. And simply because you can make an argument for something does not mean that that argument is right.
But it also doesn't discount the fact that using things like rhetoric, language, playing devil's advocate.
This is where I go. You're now trying to say I want to grab this one element that the sophists were well known for. No, it's not one element. That's what
I'm saying. I've listed now 3 or 4 different elements.
Okay,
the point is,
but this was not all they did, and this was not all they were criticized for.
Yes, it was not what they were criticized for, but it was certainly more than.
But you're suggesting that I want to say that I can identify as a sophist and that I value the sophists without any of the criticism that followed them, because this one element or this cluster of elements are valuable, and that's not what people are suggesting.
What people are suggesting I can't receive any of the criticism that accompanies that.
You have suggested that that it's like unwarranted and that you
no.
You just made this whole time saying that you agreed with the relativism, and now you're trying to say,
I don't.
Well, even if you don't agree with the relativism, this was valuable.
No,
it's like,
listen,
well, yes, we can value people who were wrong for things they were right about. In the same sense that I can value Nietzsche for the things he was right about, and not say, I am a Nietzschean. It's like I'm not, because I think he was wrong about some things.
But that doesn't end up getting that kind of credit and respect. In the philosophical world, the sophists are not only pushed aside, they're hardly even talked about. And in fact, again, sophistry has now become something of inherent fallacious argument. And I'm like, that's stupid.
But that is, it has not become that. It was that then.
No, it wasn't.
It absolutely was.
It wasn't. It was relative.
No, the contemporaries of Plato, people like him, the reason he wrote that thing is because he was saying, he may have been charitable to them, yes, but he was still saying, ultimately, I disagree with you and you're wrong. You can be charitable and say, we don't agree with you and you're wrong.
Yeah,
and the Greeks...
Agreed.
So, sophistry had a bad reputation in Greece.
Because the fact that people didn't like the fact that they
so you can't look at that as going...
and argumentation is better than truth. I agree.
But see, that's why they were criticized. You can't say it's unfair that they're criticized for the things they did.
I just said I agree. But do you not agree that I do that?
What?
I value the argument above and beyond what the actual end game is. I'm not saying specifically above truth. That makes it sound like, again, I don't hold to absolute truth in my own perception.
you have done a great job for the past 54 minutes of making it sound like that's what you were saying.
I didn't. In fact, I said I would state to anyone that I am this is why I'm saying I'm splitting hairs. To say I'm a Christian and a soph at the same time is a bit difficult. But what I'm suggesting is...
Well, that is what you've been trying to do.
Which is what I'm doing right now. I'm about to re-clarify it again. What I'm suggesting is that I will tell anyone, this is what I believe. I believe that, there is absolutely a God, that this is what, but that's all within a framework of belief that can only be based on the metric of measurement of man, of our perceptions. Because we can't know anything outside of that.
But I would disagree that is what makes it valid. Again, you are saying no. Well, yes, but in the way you're trying to say you're not, because you're trying to say no. I do believe that truth supersedes argument, but then you just said
no. I didn't.
Well,
I never said.
Then you're saying argument supersedes truth, which is what Plato and now me will criticize you for if you maintain. Fine. Because to say, well, I can make the argument regardless of whether or not it's true, it's like, well, it doesn't make it a good argument.
It doesn't have
because
to be a
logically
good argument,
speaking,
because
even
it's
within
a useful one.
Only useful in telling you what not to do, but that's not what the sophists did. The sophists would try to convince you to do things you shouldn't do.
No.
You can't deny that is one of the perks of putting arguments above truth. By what metric? Because why else would you say, well, the argument justifies itself because, well, that can convince people to do something?
No, it's not about
convincing people. When the reality is it should be you're convincing people of what's true.
Because being able to convince somebody of anything is a useful skill to have, especially in politics, in any sort of...
If you want to be sadistic and terrible to people, yes, but if...
No, not just purely for sadistic and terrible nature.
Okay, then you're saying that the argument must then be subject to truth.
No,
because if the argument is not subject to truth, the only reason that's valuable is because you want to convince people of the non-truths.
No, what I'm suggesting is somebody that has truth,
you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yes, you can. If you have...
Okay, well now, see, this is where I think you need to perhaps slow down and be more careful, because you can't say statements like that and then expect me to respect...
Like what?
That I just said you can't have your cake and eat it too, and you're saying, yes, you can. And I'm going, that is quite literally not something you could do.
Within the context of saying that you need to have absolute... If you have an absolute truth, but you're wanting to communicate it to somebody by convincing them of the fact that it's an absolute truth, but you're unable to do that because you have not learned properly how to communicate.
But that's not what the sophists advocated.
Yes.
The sophists advocated
argument above truth. You need to know how to argument.
Above truth. Whereas Plato would say, yes, you need to know how to argue in favor of truth. If your argument is above the truth, then what you're saying is any argument you can make
is useful. That's what they said.
No, any argument you can make is right.
No, that wouldn't be what they submitted.
If you put argument above truth, you must, because truth then means that the conclusion reached by the argument, even if it's not true, is still more valuable than the truth.
It's not about conclusion. Something could not even conclude. Again, this comes down to solipsism.
But you cannot order it such that the argument supersedes truth and then say that, well, the argument that is blatantly false is more valuable than the truth. Because when you put argument above truth, every argument is above the truth, not just the true ones. You're saying now anything you can argue supersedes the truth because you could argue it. You might not want to believe that. That's why I'm saying you're attempting to claim value in sophistry and saying they don't deserve this criticism when what I'm saying is what they were being criticized for.
Criticism is not something that I've never said that they don't deserve the criticism in that they shouldn't have.
You did say it was stupid a little bit ago.
What I said was it's stupid that's all that's left behind. Whereas in other philosophies, many other philosophies that have equally foolish criticisms, then also have positive things that are spun about them. So I'm like, okay, look.
Well, they don't exactly. Like, the cynics don't have much. They're not taught as correct anymore. You'd say, this is what they believed, here's why they were refuted, and this is why they kind of died out. The Stoics beat the Stoics are perhaps not the best example, but at least in their time, the Stoics were opponents of both cynics and, I forget his name. I have a book. That's really annoying. Epicureans, goodness. The Stoics, the Epicureans, and the Cynics were all at odds with each other. Now, the Stoics did eventually they didn't exactly get defeated. They almost became subsumed by later philosophies. But like the Cynics and the Epicureans, you would say, yes, we teach about them, but we teach about them as instructions for like, this is where they were wrong. So if you want to make the argument of the Sophists should still be taught because the dead ends they reached helped us be better.
Not even the dead ends they reached, though. That's my point.
Sophistry
by definition was supposed to be a fluid, I'm learning constantly.
Yes, but
that's why they valued argumentation over anything else, because
that was when they were more scattered. Was when they were like, yes, we're just teachers of things.
But I've said that. But
they weren't unified then.
The historic sophists, not the more modern sophistry that it came to be known for.
But then you can't decry the modern sophists as like, they're not true sophists because they don't believe what that's no true Scotsman.
No,
They
because
follow
there was four main.
You can't tell them they're not sophists if that's what they believe. If their philosophy stems from the original sophists, unless you're willing to say, no, I'm going to view the history and say, this is where you departed from sophism.
Correct.
But now you're going to have to do that. You can't just say, you don't get to call yourself sophist when they call themselves sophists.
Because again, I think relativism did become its own branch eventually, because the point is not that sophistry was ever solely about relativism, nor was it about skepticism or cynicism. It was about the idea that they played the devil's advocate. In fact, if you look up the devil's advocate, one of the thesaurus words that you will get is sophist. Because the whole point is that they wanted to play the other side of the coin simply because it's useful.
Yes, but it is only... This is where I think we still have the issue, is that to play devil's advocate is valuable in an almost... Not quite satirical, but that's the closest word that comes to mind. In the sense that you are saying, I am going to adopt the enemy position. In essence, it's the opposite of straw manning. You're saying, I'm actually going to try as best...
I am literally embodying your antithesis. That's the point.
But the point of doing so is to expose it in the end. The goal is you say, I'm going to adopt your argument so that rather than straw manning you and winning by sort of cheating... It's as effectively the same thing as steel manning, is saying, I'm actually going to make your argument as strong as I can so that when my argument defeats it, I show once and for all that my argument is correct.
Correct.
So then I would posit that to use the argument in that way is subjugating argument under truth. You must view it that way because you are only saying, I take the enemy position so that I can revert it to the truth. It's taking captive every thought in that sense.
Well, maybe.
Whereas if you suggest argument supersedes truth, then false arguments supersede truth because all arguments supersede truth. To then say you're no longer, then you are actually advocating the devil sincerely and saying, I believe in this falsehood and I want you to believe in this falsehood. Not, this is the argument of the falsehood and this is still how the true argument wins out. If you demote truth to second place, then any argument, regardless of how wrong, must still be first. And that is what Plato said. Argument is valuable, but truth must be first.
Correct. And Protagoras yielded, okay, fine. There are
but see, this is the point, is that I'm saying now you cannot say that, well, I believe that we should still teach and honor the sophists because they believe this. And it's
Protagoras was one of the principal sophists, and he yielded to the fact that relativism wasn't his chief philosophical position. It was that, again, being able to say, I'm going to play the opposite position, being able to make argumentation rhetoric.
But see, then I do believe that we teach the sophists in that sense as saying, this is the dead ends they reached, and this is how we got to the correct arguments as a result. So if you want them to do that, I feel like they're already doing that. What happens is
rhetoric has become its own thing, absent from any sort of sophist accreditation. And I'm going,
but see, so you're now still crediting them with being inventors of rhetoric, which I just think is incorrect.
But
teachers of it,
proponents, yes.
Well, yeah, but
it's the largest.
But you can't be a proponent of something that doesn't exist.
In the same way that
they don't get to take credit for all of it.
In the same way that cynicism was a thing before. I can't remember what
Diogenes.
No, it wasn't. It was one person before Diogenes. Diogenes actually.
I'm not sure.
Grabbed it from Anne to.
I don't know.
I can't remember.
But that's where I'm saying.
But that my point is,
you're literally conceding that yes, we should teach them as having been the wrong step that led us to the right step.
No, what I'm saying is they should get credit for some of the right steps, like rhetoric and the idea that language.
But see, that's where I go. They didn't invent rhetoric; they were teachers of it and advocated it.
Diogenes didn't invent cynicism, but he was the biggest proponent of it, and that's why he's credited for it.
He's not really. He's called Diogenes the Cynic, but that's not the same.
No, if you look up in Google who is credited for the founding of cynicism, it's Diogenes, typically.
Well, that's clearly not the case, because you just proposed the other guy. In the same sense that Stoicism comes not from Seneca or Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus, despite the fact that they're the only people who now are seen as it. It was some guy named Zeno whose writings we don't have.
Correct.
So but if you look it up, it'll say the Stoics take their writing from this guy who we don't have any writings of. So all we do have is these guys.
Correct.
Similar thing with Diogenes, I'm sure.
Correct. And rhetoric takes a lot of its training from sophists, which we don't have.
But again, training they didn't invent it, so you can't say we attribute rhetoric as like the concept to the sophists. I just go, that's not that they don't deserve.
100% a part of that whole demonstration and
demonstration, but they can't demonstrate something that doesn't exist. So to say they deserve to be credited with inventing it's like, no, they are credited as being rhetoricians. Obviously they are. Why are we talking about them as rhetoricians? But I don't think you're suggesting that they should be given the credit for like rhetoric as a thing we teach. And I don't think that's fair because rhetoric exists wherever people learn to speak. There were orators all throughout the world who had their own different ways of teaching and who did teach rhetoric differently.
Sure, so Western philosophical rhetoric, though...
And I would say they are still taught in this way. You're suggesting that they're being dishonored because we don't teach them. It's
not even saying
if anything, this is the way we teach them.
Well, I'm not even saying they're being dishonored. What I'm saying is... Do
you just take offense that the word sophistry now has a bad connotation?
It's now defined as inherently... what is it called?
Is it fair to say, though, that the definition that is now viewed, which is argumentation above truth, is what they were proposing, even though Protagoras yielded?
No, that's not. That's not the problem that I have the issue with. It's the fact that it's associated with fallacious argument, which I think is stupid because it's not.
Well, but it is, though.
It's not,
because you're suggesting that argument. They suggested argument was above
both
truth
for the positive and the negative, so it's not purely fallacious. What they were known for is.
Well, I don't believe that fallacious is part of it. It is simply the idea that
it's like
being able to argue something that devil's advocate's not fallacious.
Agreed, but if
fallacy
you look it up,
would mean
they
that
say
it's not
something to the effect of they were people that essentially argued for the sake of deceit or.
Well, but see,
that's not the point.
That is a reputation they had garnered. At that time, that is not a modern creation. The Greeks even themselves distrusted them for that reason. And you might say, well, that's unfair because the people whose writings we do have didn't do that, and perhaps it was others. But then that's where I take the argument that goes, your fault is then with those people, not with the people who have the perception. Well, you can't get mad and go, we distrust the sophists, and go, well, you should trust the sophists because these ones are good. That's no true Scotsman.
But we also get
we get the word sophisticated from the word sophos or Sophia or whatever it is.
No, it's the same thing. It's sophist. It's sophista or
but
sophistry is what sophisticated was. Because again, it's
because that's two separate. That is two separate words deriving from one root. Sophisticated does not come from sophistry. Both sophistry and sophisticated come from the word Sophia.
And it used to mean the same thing, which was you want to be a learner or a wise individual in your
in the
craft.
same word that the word philosopher also comes from the word Sophia.
No.
Yes, philosophia. So you can't say, well, all three words can stem from one root despite not being related.
So I suppose what I'm saying is, in the same way someone would call themselves a philosopher, I would call myself a sophist. But
then I would say you cannot get mad at people who distrust you if you do that, because that's like me walking down the street and saying, I'm gay. I could mean what I might mean.
I get what you're saying.
What I might mean is I'm happy because that is what the word used to mean and still does by many dictionaries mean. I can't get mad at people who misunderstand me because I can't go around saying, you shouldn't believe that. Here's the dictionary from 1883.
But I haven't ever gotten upset with you for being confused about my obsession with sophistry. What I'm saying is...
Well, you're suggesting that, like, I will still call myself this, and I think people who misunderstand are wrong, to which I go, that is... You're picking an uphill battle, which then you don't get to be mad about. If people misunderstand me,
the guy who said Sisyphus was the relatable...
But I'm saying, if I go around the street and I call myself gay, I can't get mad that people misinterpret me.
I didn't get mad.
Well, okay, I can't even be disappointed that people misinterpret me. Because I open that door for myself. So I can't be going, man, it's sad that people think I'm this kind of gay when I mean I'm this kind of gay. It's like, well, that's your fault for choosing that word. Because the problem is... The word philosopher took over for what the word sophist originally was being used for because of the negative connotation it had even amongst contemporaries. So it is not a modern perversion. The Greeks distrusted the sophists. You might say, well, it was bad apple sophists who ruined the whole bunch. Then get mad at those bad apples. You can't get mad at us for having the perception. It's like...
I would argue that it was more the large reception of Plato and his his.
No, but not. But again, I still think that that's a fair.
That became the proponent of why people distrusted the sophists. I don't
no,
think
I don't
yes,
know that.
100%.
No, because he was right. He wrote his thing because of the general consensus about we don't like the sophists. And you said he was rather charitable, and he was to an extent. But I think he wrote that not because the criticism. I don't think came from him writing that. I think he wrote it because of the criticism of the contemporaries.
I think most people quote.
Most people quote him as to why we don't agree with him,
Correct.
but we do agree with Plato because Plato was right about a great many things. I would actually even go further and say, I think Aristotle refutes Plato on all things, and I agree with Aristotle more often when he disagrees with Plato. So, does that mean that I castigate Plato? No.
In the same way that I don't think you should castigate sophists. That's all I'm saying.
Well, but I don't know that people castigate them. You might argue that, well, the modern term does lack nuance, at which point I go, grieve the wish and call yourself a philosopher, because that's the word people use. I call myself happy, not gay, because I don't want to be misunderstood.
Sure.
If I'm insistent on using an anachronistic term, I must bear the misunderstandings that follow.
I guess
so. If you want to have this conversation with every person you discuss this with,
sure,
then that is up to you. But I think you'll get frustrated fairly quickly doing that.
The reason why I adopt the notion of sophistry being something that I like as a moniker is because it does have a particular and precise connotation to something that I do feel like is similar to me. Again, I don't.
Well, the more you lean into the argument, if you start leaning into the yes, argument is valid despite truth.
I have always been that.
Yes, but then
that's why I'm saying, why do you not comfortably apply sophistry to me? 100%.
Because you are not someone who has ever said before, I believe an argument is good regardless of the truth. You've never said that. And in fact, the devil's advocate, as the example I gave, is only useful if it is to undermine the enemy position.
To the truth. Yeah, and I understand that. I guess that's where
So my point is, if you start calling yourself a sophist, then yeah, sure, you're going to have to explain this to people. But if you start calling yourself a sophist and saying that I think that they were right about argumentation superseding truth, then you will earn the ire that people have towards sophists.
And the only thing,
because you're now leaning into the thing that they were criticized for.
Me from that, I would say this. If I did not have a moral grounding in Christianity, I would probably be a full-on relativist sophist, in that I would say, no, it doesn't matter. You can't know the truth, therefore it doesn't matter, and who cares? Where, again, because I don't think they were relativists in the truest sense. Maybe fully developed relativism became pluralism, but I think on a sophist level, they probably would have been on a more passive level saying, who cares? We don't know what the truth is.
But see, that's just that's agnostic at that point, and I'm not sure that there were agnostics back then who we also don't necessarily propose.
But what I'm suggesting is that the sophists saw that because of the fact that there was no way of knowing one way or the other, that it was simply the road, if in the Zen sense, it was simply the road and walking on it that was useful.
Well, and when you say things like, they saw that there was no way of knowing, they didn't see that, because you're suggesting that what they saw was an absolute truth. You are actually using the language they opposed to prop them up.
No.
Because you can't say they saw it, you would say they believed it.
Okay,
and they argued for it.
Way. Yes,
but you're nonetheless suggesting that what they argued was correct. You're saying they saw that nothing was true, and I think that's true. It's like you're kind of tying yourself in knots.
No.
By saying, I think that the ultimate truth is that we can't know the ultimate truth. It's like, well, that's a useless phrase.
Again,
the ultimate, as a matter of fact, it's not even a useless phrase. It's the ultimate truth is that we can't know. The ultimate truth is that we can't know. It's a circular argument that you literally will never get out of.
Correct.
So the only useful thing to do with it is to never use it.
It's to stick it.
Literally. So this is where I'm just saying, you're proposing that they were right about what they believed, and that's where I go, no, I'll stop you there. Because if you want to say they provided a useful tool set, but they perhaps got their priorities misaligned, then I'll say, well, sure, there's plenty of philosophies that are like that, and those are useful because they point towards saying, all right, these are the things that were useful, and this is the dead ends. But circular arguments aren't useful at all.
And that I actually simply, on a solipsistic level, disagree with you on, because I do think
so. You think it would be valuable if I said, literally never stopped saying the phrase, the only absolute truth is that we can't know, the only absolute truth is that we can't know, because the reason how you know a circular argument is if you take the definition, insert it back into itself, then the statement, then literally the mere act of saying the statement never ends. And that is, and you yourself were talking about, well, if it can't be argued, what's the use? That's certainly no use because you can never even say it fully.
Right, which is why you don't need to worry about what
Which is
absolute
why
truth is.
See, that's just
Let
where
it
I
go,
go.
which is the solipsistic
Well, no, but
sense.
see, I don't think let it go because I
Yes.
think the mere fact that you don't know it doesn't rob it of its validity. That is quite literally the definition of absolute truth.
Only because of the fact that I am a Christian do I
No.
believe that.
No. The absolute truth could be that God does not exist, and me not believing that would mean that I'm wrong.
Sure.
Like, literally, I'm not...
For me,
It is
I'm
not
saying,
merely an acceptance of the divine to say the absolute truth must be a God figure. The absolute truth could be that cheese is the ultimate good.
Okay, you are redounding to cheese.
No,
Anytime you redound to
I'm
cheese,
sim-
we know it's
no,
too late.
my point is the absurdity of saying merely it does not need to be an argument of divine importance. You could actually say that something secular is the divine ultimate truth, and it is regardless if people or don't believe it, because that's what absolute truth means. So you might say, well, it's only because I'm a Christian that I must concede a concept of absolute truth. It's like, no, I don't believe that that's the case.
Yeah, for me,
I believe that you could be an atheist, and atheism is your absolute truth, and
because
you'd be
the
wrong.
fact that it's belief.
yeah, but
that's
then
my
it's no
point.
longer absolute truth because I mean,
But that's everything.
No,
Do you
because-
see?
but see, this is my
you
point.
caught yourself in
No.
my argument.
no, nice try.
Yes.
No, it's not the case because regardless of what you believe, absolute truth will exist by definition.
But you don't know what that is.
That is irrelevant to its being absolute truth.
And so
I
what
could be
use is it?
wrong,
That again is
but
what
see
we're-
that I could be wrong, and because we would say, well, you're acting like, well, absolute truth is just a sneak premise because as a religious person you must. It's like, no, you could be an atheist, and atheism might be what you believe to be absolute truth, and furthermore, you might even be right. But me believing what I believe would therefore be wrong. I've never once suggested that the existence of absolute truth means that we're all right. You cannot believe in the absolute truth, and that makes you wrong. Those who believe in it would therefore be right, even if they don't have a way of proving it, because that is the nature of absolute truth. Absolute truth is right regardless of what it's believed, because that is the definition. Now you might say, well, isn't that in some way a faith-based thing? Because
It is,
if
but
it can't be proved, but see, that's where I go, how do you know that it can't be proved? You could very well be wrong that absolute truth can't be known.
Well, and the clarification.
You're making absolutes by denying absolutes.
Right.
That's the issue.
The
with it.
clarification is: are you unearthing truth or are you constructing truth? And I would say I'm not somebody who believes that truth is constructed. I do think it's unearthed, which is why Protagoras finally yielded. Okay, sure, certain things are soft. Are again, Sophia. They're actually that's.
But see, this is why I feel like if you listen back to this, I at least think you'll understand why I've been so confused. Is because you have hopped,
which is exactly what sophistry is.
and this is why people didn't like them.
Maybe
Because no one freaking knew what they were arguing. Because you're going, okay, we started out by saying, yes, I believe in relativism. Well, no, even if you strip the relativism, I believe that the sophists deserve
I have
credit.
never not said I don't believe in relativism. My point is, it's
Except you have
solely
conceived that,
based
well,
on the
then
fact
there
that-
is absolute truth. I guess I must concede because even Protagoras
that doesn't-
succeeded. In
but
which I
that
go,
doesn't-
well, then that disproves relativism.
It doesn't, though.
It does
Because-
because relative truths existing in addition to absolute truth is sort of a negation of relativism.
But again, I've already stated there's no way of knowing which truths are relative and which truths are absolute.
And
Therefore,
I would, but the
there's
response
no,
to that is irrelevant to what the concept of absolute truth.
and that's where I say to me that is 100% relative because if you don't know
Relevant,
it,
I said,
you
not-
go back to
I said relevant, not relative. Whether or not you believe absolute truth has no bearing on its being absolute truth. In the same sense that aliens being on Mars, whether I believe it or anyone believes it or no one believes it, does not change the fact that it is so.
But if man is the measurement of all things, how are you supposed to know one way or the other?
I don't believe that. See, that's where I don't believe that is meant in that sense, that man is like the metric. I think that is meant in a more... Because humanism is not that, like, what man says goes.
No, I agree.
But see, that is how
That's
every
not what
time
I
you
just
have brought
stated.
it up is what it sounds like you're trying to say.
Okay.
Is that, well, what man says is what
No,
must
what
be.
I'm saying is man can only measure based on his own knowledge and perception.
But that doesn't
That
make...
is the only thing
But
we
that
have.
that does not negate the existence of reality regardless of perception.
It does.
If there are aliens on Mars that we don't know about, they're still there whether we know about them or not. In the same sense that if the tree falls It still fell, even if no one saw
But
it.
there's no way of being able to actually identify.
Well, there is
what truths
actually.
are
That's
there
the
and
thing
what
about
truths
that. That is the thing about this whole concept, is that if I say there are aliens on Mars, that's a thing that I am positing something which has a disprovable test. This is why I dislike solipsism, is because if I say aliens are on Mars, I am, in saying that, also giving or implying the necessary framework for disproving me. Because if you could then go to Mars and show, yep, we've mapped the whole planet, there are no aliens, I am opening up that option by claiming it, by saying, if you could go to Mars,
Correct.
you could
So
show
if
me
you
to
want
be
to say
incorrect.
sophists
Whereas
are
solipsism
non-committal,
has
that's certainly true.
solipsism has no implied disprovable argument, because
Correct.
there is absolutely there's no metric by which you could disprove it, which makes
Or
it
prove
a
it.
somewhat useless argument. Whereas
Correct.
if I say that there are aliens on Mars, then that is at least a provable statement.
But this is why.
And whether or not it is proved does not justify whether or not it's true. Because even if we never did it, it would still be true.
I'm going to spit something, and this is why you have such an issue with sophistry, is that sophistry is literally the embodiment of solipsism in philosophical form.
Well, I don't necessarily deny that, but that's why I would argue.
That
If
you
you want to
don't
go
like-
that, then I would say, well, you're now going to, but see, that's why I would say on its ethical and or moral basis, it is of no use. On its practical basis, in the terms of, well, rhetoric is useful for finding truth, in the sense that you could make an untrue argument in a straw man sense, so long as the truth subjugates the argument. I'm willing to accept all of that, but if we'll go back to now saying, well, no, actually, this is why I'm confused. It's because you keep hopping around and going,
I'm not intending
what if
to
I
hop
give
around.
you
What
this
is it?
different interpretation? What if
No,
I give
I'm
you
not-
this
I
different
have not
interpretation?
I don't feel like I've changed my interpretation at all in this entire thing.
Well, then you certainly haven't communicated it consistently.
How so? What part
Because-
is not consistent?
Well, because you started off by saying, I believe in relativism, and I said, this is why I don't.
Submit that that's
And then you said, well, I guess I have to concede that there is some absolute truth, but then I take a consequentialist point, which means, well, if we can't know it, then what's the point?
relative.
And then we went back to literally the text of Plato, which says, even Protagoras said, well, I suppose I have to concede that it would exist even if it can't be taught, which is literally him conceding to the argument.
but only in that he has to concede that it does exist. But I still don't think that disproves.
But that doesn't make you a relativist, that makes you a consequentialist, because whether or not it exists,
Sure,
what
but
use is
again,
it?
I
That's
say-
consequentialism, not relativism.
But again, sophistry is not relativism.
I agree.
Relativism became its own thing later.
But see, this is where you were arguing exactly the opposite 10 minutes ago.
No, what I'm
That relativism, no, they were known for relativism, and I do agree with
On an
relativism. And now you're
early
saying,
level,
well, no, they weren't only known for relativism, and I think I
because
agree
I'm
with
clarifying what types. Again, relativism on a sophist level was we can't know, therefore who cares?
But see, that's where I also
Whereas actual
disagree with the notion
relativism is
of
pluralist.
it is an absolutist statement to say we can't know. Because how can you know? We can't know that we can't know. No,
It's
in the same
biblical.
sense that we
That's-
can't know
but
that
again,
we
it's
know.
belief. That's a cyclical argument,
Which is
too.
not truth or not knowing. You are proposing that the absolute truth is that we cannot know,
Which is a cyclical argument.
which is
Again,
an absolute truth, which makes your whole argument. It's like, well, then your argument is useless to say we cannot know that we cannot know that we cannot know. That goes nowhere.
That's
You are assuming that the sophists were correct when they made the assumption that we couldn't know, but you
that's
cannot
not an
say we
assumption.
know
You
that
can
we.
based on a belief in that.
No.
Again, God
How,
says that you.
if I propose
know.
that the aliens exist on Mars, how can you know that I'm not correct? In the same way, you could say, how do you know that you're right? How do you know that I'm wrong?
I don't, which is why it's relative.
No, because it might still be true. It's not relative if it's true.
Okay.
Relativism, I do believe, means the notion of, it's essentially a form of agnosticism. If this is the room, if you want to now take a moralistic approach rather than the more practical or consequentialist and say, well, it's true that we can't know. It's like, well, then how did we know that? This is why solipsism goes nowhere. How can you know that you can't know? You can't! This is the whole point of why it's the only good thing to do with it is drop it and go on with something else.
So again,
This is my whole point. You cannot say that they were right because that would imply that you
Correct.
know that they were right.
Which is why the only construct that sophists have really contributed to is the fact that argumentation is what they were known for, to the extent that they were argumentators without any.
Which is why they were criticized, which means that you, if you want to propose that, will not only get that criticism, but the more you lean into it, the more you will earn that criticism.
True.
So that's, again, I don't know why it is you're stuck with this, because I do believe that you could just call yourself rather than say, well, a sophist is unique because it would mean both thinker and orator, to which I go, fine, let's grieve the wish of using one simple word and just call yourself a philosopher and an orator. Because that would then communicate everything you want without the baggage that you want to avoid. If you don't want to avoid the baggage,
that's all.
I don't think it is. It's less concise. It's not less precise.
Yeah,
it means the same things. It just is said.
It's missing, devil's advocate. The notion of
orator or fine rhetorician. I call myself a philosopher and a rhetorician. That then that contains everything you wanted from them while excising the negative. If that's what you want, then I would say you're going to have to do this or take on the criticism. Which, if you were, the funny thing is, if you're willing to take it on, you will actually earn it in that sense. Because you're saying, I actually believe that the argument supersedes the truth. At which point you go, now you're actually embodying what everyone criticized them for. So you can't say, well, they're criticizing them unfairly if you're going to then embody the things that they were criticized for.
I did not say they were criticized unfairly. I was saying they're defined unfairly.
No, because what we define them as is what they did.
No. Which is fallacious arguments, which is...
No, I've never heard that argument. Devil's advocate is not fallacious argument.
I agree. Look it up, though. If you look up,
I did. This is why I wanted to talk about this, is because you kept bringing it up, and I was like, I need to finally understand what it is he's trying to get at here.
When you look up sophistry, what does sophistry mean? It's a term applied to...
It usually means twisting...
deception.
Yeah, yes, exactly. But that's not fallacious. No. Fallacious is strictly, logically, fallacies, which is improper arguments. Logically inconsistent arguments, not just merely deceptive arguments. I will die on the pedant hill. I will admit that much.
Okay, that's fine. So if you the notion that it was purely or by definition,
and I also don't think that is unfair to say that that's unfair definition, because the reason people distrusted them was because people then distrusted them. That is not a modern twisting of the meaning.
But why? If somebody like Protagoras was willing to have a conversation,
well, because presumably we would have to then say the most in the Occam's razor sense, of course, because you can't know, because we don't. It's the past, and the past is we only have what survives. So that there may have been proof that doesn't survive. We would have to assume, well, then there probably were plenty, or at least, even if there weren't a lot, there were enough bad actors doing this, that it gave the profession a bad name, to which you might say, well, that's sad, and we shouldn't let bad actors define the profession, but the fact of the matter is,
they do.
Bad actors do, by definition, define the profession. That's unavoidable. So if you want to say, well, it's sad that happens, then I'll agree with you. It's sad that bad actors ruin things.
I suppose that's
just
true.
a fact of life.
What I'm getting at is, I wish there was a particular word that encapsulated what I believe was the best of the sophists, which is that they were willing to.
But see, this is what I think of philosophy. I think philosophy does do that. I think the word philosopher.
It doesn't, though, because it doesn't include.
Well, I think it's better because sophist literally would mean expert in a field. That is what
I think is also.
Whereas I think actually philosopher is better because it does not claim expertise, but says I am a lover of wisdom, which means even if I am wrong, a true philosopher, when confronted with being wrong, will change his ways if he truly loves wisdom. I feel like this is a more ennobling turn of phrase than simply "I'm the expert."
No, because
I am wise.
Because also sophist means learner, so I think that's.
I have not heard that definition because it comes from Sophia,
which means
wisdom.
Yeah,
and then the etymology that I heard suggested that it was like sophisto something, which was before it became a philosophical term, was actually meant was attributed to any craftsman who achieved a rank of high regard.
It was like
which would mean I am the expert. So it's literally I am the expert woodworker. I am the expert this. I am the expert that. So literally, then to go around would be like going around calling yourself the expert. Which
I suppose that's a bit
exactly. Whereas I think the philosopher says I am not wisdom itself, I am a student of wisdom.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
So I don't understand why you feel that the word deserves the defense you're giving it, because I think that the word which replaced it is actually the better word anyways, regardless of the context. I think it encapsulates...
It's because on a romantic level, I don't like the fact that things like that get hijacked by idiots that do it a disservice, and it's possible that.
Well, but see, then you're just mad at like the human condition.
Well, yeah,
which...
but I mean, with people like Georgius and Protagoras, where I go, they have great concepts, and in fact, I agree with much of what they're saying, and they would call themselves sophists. I go, I wish that was still a thing, you know.
Yeah, but see, nowadays Plato would call himself a philosopher, and why is that any better? Or why is that not better, or why is that any worse?
There was a specific emphasis on argumentation and learning.
Well, then that would just be call yourself a rhetorician.
A rhetorician, I suppose,
because that's the word we would use now.
I suppose.
And I mean, Aristotle had whole essays written about rhetoric.
Yeah,
he did. I have not yet read them, so I can't say that they're like of equal quality. But I mean, it wasn't like the people who opposed the Sophists opposed rhetoric. They just opposed what they were using.
I suppose I also give credence to, and part of the, again, maybe partially romantic idea is that I also think being able to revitalize some of the pre-Socratic philosophical ideals is an interesting concept, because I think they are so fundamental that it's a little bit like what happened with Freud, where it's like much of his good good perspectives actually just ended up getting encapsulated into psychology, and then people go, "Well, he was a whack."
I still think that there's a bit of unfairness in suggesting that, like, oh, they created rhetoric, or they created ontology, or they created the various things that they taught, because they did teach more than rhetoric.
Yes, but
they went around
came about
teaching
it from a very
anything they could teach.
Angle.
Well, see, that's where I go, I don't know that in the very beginning they all had this relativistic angle. I think that arose, and as it arose, the criticism arose.
Maybe.
They weren't criticized when they were just going around teaching. I mean, some might have criticized them for charging for the teaching. That was primary. That was like the only thing that separated Socrates. There are plenty that I would disagree with the modern folks, but like people of the time thought, oh, well, Socrates, he's a sophist too, despite the fact that he doesn't charge. It's like, okay, you could have made the argument, save for the fact that it was Socrates who goes, no, there are absolute truths. Argument is subordinate to truth.
Which, interestingly enough,
that would be the point at which Socrates
Democritus actually didn't have a problem with the fact that relativism wasn't a thing. In fact, he was very much of the religious notion that there was absolute truths, and yet he would call himself a sophist. So it's a little bit difficult.
Well, yeah, so that's why I'm saying relativism and sophistry are not linked, despite, they are linked. They are not
exclusive.
Definitionally, they're not exclusive. But this is where I'm going. If you want to argue that they don't have to be that, then you could argue that. But you're suggesting, no, they were that, and that's what they deserve to be.
In getting in this argument, I knew it was going to be a splitting of hairs, because the hard thing is I would love to be able to say, yeah, this is what I believe, I have a leaning or a particular aligning with these philosophers who would identify themselves as sophist. I'm going, it's sad that branch got just absolved in the, I guess, post Plato, Aristotle era, where people were going, okay, they just are essentially arguing to the point of dishonesty. And I'm like, well, that is sad that's what it ended up becoming. Well, if you continue
to cling to the relativistic argument, I think you're going to keep courting that criticism.
Yeah.
Because I think that if you want to make the argument, it's like, well, you can't know anything. To which I go, this is why, and I admit, as something of an absurdist, I'm a little bit actually surprised you never brought this up as like, oh, but how can you be an absurdist? Because I did wonder. I was like, well, the thing with being an absurdist is sort of the idea that I would say, I maintain the fact that whether or not you know the absolute truth is irrelevant to it being absolute truth. I do still have some sympathy for your more consequentialist view that's like, well, if it can't be communicated, then what use is it? And I go, this is why I'm honestly of the opinion that is a sort of Stoic absurdist meld, which is, as much as I can't know that I'm right, you can't know that I'm wrong, at which point I'm going to do what I believe to be right, and the Stoic concept is I will also own the consequences.
Well, and
because I think the issue with the more relativistic,
saying something.
well,
like
the relativistic approach feels like a means of absolving yourself of the consequences.
It
like,
is
well, how
slightly,
could I know?
and maybe that's dishonest.
And that's where I say
that's the
if you
part
take
that
the
they would say
absurdist
is-
stoic, which is I go, can I know that God exists?
Yeah.
I actually think foundationally, there are plenty of Christian people who make the arguments like there was a thing a while back of it was not Stephen Crowder, but it was a similar to like the change my mind concept.
Yeah.
But it was like, oh, someone, and it was in this conversation with an atheist where he suggested, well, okay, you say you don't believe God exists, but could you be wrong? And the guy went, well, yeah, but could you be wrong that God does exist? And then the guy went, oh, no, of course, because I know him. And I'm like, no offense, but you're going to lose this guy because I'm not going to say you're disingenuous. You do come across as disingenuous because I think any true Christian must know the fact that it's like faith necessitates the not knowing.
Right, exactly.
So could I be wrong that God doesn't exist? I certainly could. And I mean, as you mentioned, the Paul concept, like, and
Paul actually makes
pity us all if we are.
Exactly. Paul makes the argument, I'd be rather off on this side of the fence than you're on the other.
But I also think that there's this element of like, it isn't religious faith without if you could know.
Correct.
Like, the reason God didn't appear in the sky instead of sending Christ to die so that people could deny him.
Right.
It's like, he could have appeared in the sky and just went, I am God and I do exist.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, but that would have then, it wouldn't be faith at that point, it would just be fact.
And in fact, he did do that in the Old Testament, and they still didn't freaking believe.
Well, there's truth to that, too. Well, he never, appeared in the sky with his face.
I suppose.
I mean, plenty of miraculous things that should have clued them in, but I mean, sure. But this is where I'm going. I think you have to acknowledge a certain degree of, I could be wrong, but there is... The issue to me with relativism is that it is endlessly susceptible to the Uno reverse, which is, how can you know? Well, I can't. Yeah, so shut up, is basically the argument. It's like, I will concede that I may not. I am convinced by the scientific argument that Pluto's not a planet. So I would say, well, I think you're wrong if you hold that it is. I also will say that despite my belief in it, even all of us could be wrong, and perhaps there's some other thing that we might find later. Right. So this is where I think to say, what I believe now, which is deemed untrue, was true back then, so I can still go on believing it. Because no one can prove it. It's like, that's where I think you're weaseling out. Whereas to say,
and maybe that's
the absurdist
what they mean
stoic,
by
which is the equal amounts of, well, I can't know either. But because it's a useless point to point that out, I'm going to go on anyways. Well, the sun, I can't know the sun's going to rise. I'm still going to set my alarm.
Right. Well,
and more to the point, I'm going to own the consequences of it.
Well, that's the difference, I think, in something like Stoicism. If you compare Stoicism directly to something like Sophism, that is where people say maybe that it's dishonest. And I could see, I suppose, where they're getting there if they're saying it's dishonest.
Well, it's the Pontius Pilate, what is truth? It's like, that was literally him washing his hands of it going, not my problem.
But to be honest, if I was in his position, that's exactly what I would have done. That's why I say sophistry
because you
really
are a fallen man, yes. I would have done it too, probably, but I wouldn't have been morally right to do so.
No, of course not. But my point is, in his position,
like that is moral condemnation on Pontius's part. By that was not meant to go, oh, what a philosopher, how wise he is. He's going, no, this is him going,
no, he was a
I
politician.
wash my hands and what do I know? Exactly. He was the eminent politician just going, well, I pushed that to the side. How can you know?
But that's ultimately what I'm saying. I very much align with that notion.
But that that seems to suggest that he was right to do that.
No. What I'm saying is that's very much a sophist notion, and on a gut level, that is the kind of thinking that I have.
Well, yes, I have many thoughts on my gut level that I, by my higher mind, choose to say, no, I actually think that that's not correct.
Sure. But...
to say it appeals to me on a oh, that does make sense. Yeah, there's plenty of things that I go, oh, that does make sense, but then I have to acknowledge, okay, but this makes sense, but then this does come in conflict with this, which means I have to choose.
And the only thing that
whereas relativism has the connotation of going, well, I don't have to choose because who knows? Well, you might say that's unfair. Maybe it is. I don't know.
The only thing for me, I think, that sophism actually comes into conflict with in staunch conflict with is the notion of the fact that I have faith in, in God and Jesus Christ.
Yeah, but see, even then, I don't know that...
Because
that's not wholly relevant, because you could be an atheist, and atheism could be the absolute truth.
Right. So, I don't know.
Because, again, I do maintain the concept of... See, this is, again, this is coming back to Job, the idea of God's not God because he's good.
Sure.
Like, this notion of, well, we worship God because he's good. No, we worship God because he's God. Job worshipped God when God was manifestly not good.
Yeah.
In his eyes, I mean, of course.
Sure.
I'm not trying to say, again.
Yeah.
It is a faith-based axiom to say, well, God is the absolute good. Therefore, he is deserving of praise regardless of what happens to me.
Right.
Now, you could make that claim for anything else, but I'm saying this is kind of where I go, this is why I don't like the, if you can't know it, what does it matter? It's like, well, yeah, okay, had Job had actually died, and God never did reveal himself to him, and he never was restored, he would have still been, it would have still been, a moral victory for him to have gone till the end saying, I don't know why God is allowing this, but he is sovereign and I will not denounce him.
Yes.
He could have never gotten the resolution to that, and he would still have been right. So that's where I take, even though I would consider myself an absurdist, I do make a distinction between absurdism and relativism, which is you can only make the best decision you can make, which may not be right, but I don't believe that absolves you of, like, the absolute truth is still out there, and you're just kind of hoping that you're going for it, and you might not be. If you have evidence that you're not, maybe you should change. I mean, that's where you go, I don't know that absurdism does not, at least in principle, from what I have researched into it, carry moral weight. Like, whereas relativism, I mean, is there any real distinction between relativism and moral relativism? I feel like they are often used the same way. Because they beget each other, in my opinion. Like, if statements
the other,
if statements of
reverse.
fact can't be known to be true, then how can moral statements be known to be true? Like, if I can't tell you that...
But I think the reverse doesn't have to be true. Like, if statements of moral truth can't be true, but statements of fact can be true, that's a true... That to me makes sense, because on a scientific
even less
level...
than relativism.
No, because...
Relativism would say that you can't know anything, even your own senses. You can't... That's solipsism. You can't trust your own senses.
Right.
I could tell you, no, this is green. And you might be looking at it going, no, it's not, it's black. And I would say your own senses could be lying to you. And you would have no way of knowing.
Right.
And because you would have no way of knowing, it's useless. Because this is why I just think it's an endless cycle of how can you know that you know that you know? It's just, it doesn't go anywhere. Because the relativists would not say, well, it's only moral truths you can't know. It's anything you can't know. You can't know empirically.
Say in the same way that I was talking about on the road, then the very Zen principle, I think that coincides with this sophist idea of the argument is more important than the end game.
I don't believe that's Zen at all.
No, because it's not about the fact that the end game is irrelevant in that it's not important what result you get as much as it is walking the path is the point.
But an argument and walking the path are not the same thing.
I'm conflating the two now.
Well, I agree you're conflating the two, but I don't think I don't think the Taoists or the Zen monks would agree that those are the same thing. Because they would argue that to walk the path, and again, they would say the Tao is good because it's the Tao. You walk the Tao because it's the only way to be in balance, and that there is no reason for it other than that it is. Here's a thing that's fascinating, since we're on the tangent. I learned, and it's funny actually, because of the fact that I was not aware, I almost feel like I've had an experience similar to that of the Greeks in the time of Christ. Because logos as a concept was a philosophical concept to the Greeks before Christ. So therefore, in the beginning was the word was a revolutionary statement. I recently learned that in Chinese translations of the Bible, the 1 John passage is, in the beginning was the Tao, and the Tao was with God, and the Tao was God. And that, because I have studied Taoism, that had the same kind of mental impact on me that I feel like the Greeks would have had, who would have known the logos concept and been like, whoa, that they would have felt the importance of like this is quite literally the same thing as, you know, to the Greeks and to the Chinese is equal to what the Jews would have thought when it says when, you know, Abraham was I am. That is the same statement of like, how can you say that? You've just said something so transcendently significant that we must stone you if you're wrong.
Right.
And so I was like, that was fascinating. And so it is quite literally this. I mean, I have said for a long time that I do believe that you could very comfortably subordinate Taoist philosophy into Christian theology without really any. And I mean, this has only proven that to me. So I do believe that the essence of Taoism is that the Tao is the Tao because it's the Tao. I mean, they literally say, you know, that the Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao. Or I guess the Tao that can be walked, this similar translation.
Yeah.
But so you could make the relativistic argument that's like, well, you know, if it can't be spoken, but I'm like, the point, then it's not the Tao. But that's where you go, well, that's kind of the point, is that even if you could speak it, it wouldn't be it. They actually take even a step beyond the absolute truth. My argument, what relative truth might exist in addition to absolute truth, they would say, no. If it can be spoken, it's not the absolute truth. So I'm not sure that I can say the Taoists and the relativists share much, other than I suppose the Taoists don't take right and wrong to be. That's not the dichotomy on which they base their morality is right and wrong. It's more order versus chaos.
Maybe I'm conflating truth with right versus wrong, you know.
Well, that's but even that is an assumption that like we associate truth with the right, when in reality, right and wrong, truth is far more comfortably used in a order versus chaos sense, which is much more the Taoist morality is order versus chaos rather than right versus wrong. So I don't know. That anyway. Chinese thing, literally, I was quite like, oh, okay. It was, as someone who I've even thought, I was like, I would be very actually curious about the effort and like the mental exercise that it would be to try and write some form of essay on like connections between, because this is one of the reasons why evangelism because it all actually stems from the passage of Confessions of Augustine, where he refers to, he calls it, I think, the mind of God or something like that, which is, he basically states very Taoist sounding arguments of like, you know, if the world might not truly be, and this all might simply be that we are in the mind of God, that all reality is the mind of God, and therefore that's why there really isn't right and wrong, because if God is in everything, then there is no wrong, there is only disorder. And I was like, this is a very Taoist sounding argument. And I was like, well, you could call the Tao the mind of God, which would, I suppose, in some sense be exactly what the Greeks meant by logos was, I mean, not necessarily the word of God, but the word, logic, that which manifests reality in a sense. Saying that isn't just God, that is God. Or that isn't just with God, it is God. So I felt I was just, I guess, because that was one of those things that is only taught in reverse, where when you grow up in the church and then you go, oh yes, this is what logos means, and then you already have the implication, so it's not a revelation. Whereas I was not aware that this was actually how the Bible was translated into Chinese. So I was like, oh, okay. I felt the weight of that revelation in a way that I feel probably the Greeks did at the time.
That's like when I realized that the word for hope is related to waiting in Spanish. Esperanza is hope, and esperar is wait. And I'm like, wow. That's potent. See, I'm surprised. You really should be watching the Exodus series, because there are so many times when they'll harp on a word. They won't even necessarily state what the revelation that comes to me, but there'll be moments where I'm like, oh yeah, that is the same word as that. Like, when you don't consider the fact that they call what a church service, as in serve. Yeah.
I was like, why is it that these two words They're not different words. We think, yes, service has two definitions. No, it's one definition. We just use it in two contexts and therefore think it's two different words.
I'm so comfortable with the idea.
But there's like a whole bunch of those. And now I can't remember, like, because that series is like, they're just turning all of these words out at once. So I'm like, oh yeah, that is the same word. That's crazy. Anyways, well, we said we weren't.
That's you trying to unpack.
Well,
that.
I thought
and
I could just snipe and be like, this is the root of why I think you're wrong, and I thought I could just like.
Well, and to be fair, I think that you are right in saying it's such a diluted concept now that it's become. If you claim that, it comes with the connotations that you don't specifically want.
Well, and again, I take a somewhat stoic argument, which is, I mean, to be charitable, I will apply this to myself first before I apply it to anyone else. But it's like, okay, when in TV and in popular media you see the caricature of the prudish, rude, judgmental Christian character, do I get mad at the people who wrote that, or does my anger to belong to those who promote that superstition?
Yeah.
So, for example, I, as a Christian, should, and in fact rightly do, bear more ill will towards the Westboro Baptist Church.
Yeah.
Rather than the news articles who portray Christians as being judgmental bigots. It's like, do I think you're wrong? Yes. And I suppose there is some degree of like, I have a reasonable amount to say, I have a fair expectation that a news publication will at least be academically honest enough to point out that this is not a major percentage of the Christian population. But I still must also contend with the fact that I go, no, these people who create that are just as much the people I should be upset with.
Right. And
this was the same argument where it's like, okay, the concept of, well, not all Muslims are terrorists. It's like, well, then who? As a Muslim, if you are a devout Muslim, do you get mad at the Westerners who think that, or should you get mad at the terrorists who in your eyes, pervert your ideology? It's like, if anything, I say the perversion of your ideology should carry more ire in you than the perceptions of other people. Because one is simply, again, it's a thing you can't change that's in the minds of others, whereas the other is like sacrilege against your deepest held beliefs.
Maybe that would make it easier if I could parse out which sophists ended up going rogue.
Well, and that's the problem is, we don't have any writings from any but the two of them.
Right. Well, there's four of them in total, but
then we have writings. I thought it was just Gorgias and Protagoras were the only who have extant writings.
True. There's bits to.
We know the names of many others, but we don't know exactly what they claimed.
Correct.
At least that was the assessment I saw.
Yeah. We have rough ideas of what they taught, but it's not fully fleshed out. Yes, correct. Because we don't have full, to my understanding, much of it was framed around either early historians or in cases like Plato, it's like obviously framed around an idea of, okay.
Well, yeah, we know about them from their critics, which means we may not know a faithful adaptation.
Which is, yeah. But again, I have to just be okay with the fact that that is what it is, yeah. So there you go.
Well, yeah, that was something. No game gonna follow this.
Just a guy with like a big pipe.
Big pipe? What are you,
I don't know.
What are you claiming about yourself?
No, I'm just saying, like, in a philosophical sense, I feel like the only thing that would really be appropriate was just some guy smoking on a.
I'm gonna be bothered. There's a part of me that's like, what did we talk about for 7 minutes to get a nice even hour mark? But
I gotta get to.
I gotta get out of here, man. All right, fine. Well, that clears the back catalog at least. We'll start afresh next week.